Priceless, Understanding Mass Psychology in the Game of Pricing. Written by William Poundstone, an American best-selling author and two-time Pulitzer Prize nominee, Priceless has received widespread acclaim. Some even compare it to Robert Cialdini's classic work, Influence. Tech entrepreneur and Smartisan founder Luo Yonghao strongly recommends this book. This book delves into the mysteries of pricing. While traditional economics teaches us that prices are determined by supply and demand, Priceless reveals there's more to the story. Beyond supply and demand, factors like product placement, price setting, and shopping environment design subtly influence consumer psychology. By understanding and leveraging consumer psychology in pricing, businesses can effectively increase prices and boost profits. The title, Priceless, carries two meanings. 1. Product pricing isn't related to cost. It's more of a psychological game. For example, a beer with a $10 production cost might sell for $15 in one place and $100 in another, with consumers potentially finding both prices reasonable. 2. Understanding the psychological process of price formation is invaluable. Knowing how to make consumers accept your pricing is worth its weight in gold. The book's core content covers how prices are created, how businesses influence consumer price perceptions, and how consumers can avoid pricing traps. The book offers value in two ways. 1. For businesses selling products, services, or ideas, it reveals how to make consumers willingly spend more. 2. For consumers, it helps identify pricing tactics and make more rational purchasing decisions. The book explores three main aspects. 1. How prices are actually formed. 2. How businesses can profit from pricing strategies. 3. How consumers can avoid pricing traps. Regarding price formation, the first concept to understand is price relativity. For instance, when encountering a new breed of dairy cow, most people wouldn't know its value unless they're professional cattle farmers or dealers. Which is more expensive, the price of 2 cows or 1 cow? You might say this is obvious. Of course, 2 cows cost more. This common-sense observation reveals an interesting phenomenon. Even though you don't know the exact price of 1 cow, you can still make relative price judgments. In fact, just as we're not good at pricing a cow, we're also not skilled at pricing many other things in life. We struggle with determining absolute prices, but are quite good at making relative price comparisons, deciding whether product A is more or less expensive than product B. However, determining the exact price of product A itself is challenging. It's like picking up 2 bags of rice from the ground. While you might struggle to tell their exact weights, you can immediately tell which is heavier between a 7.5-pound bag and an 8-pound bag. Even without knowing the precise weights, you can judge their relative relationship. You might wonder, if people aren't good at determining specific prices, how do we end up with all these clearly priced products in our daily lives? This brings us to the second important principle in pricing. Price construction comes from environmental cues. Our familiarity with product prices is actually an illusion, created by our constant exposure to prices in media and stores. We've simply memorized prices others have set. It's like someone with poor vision who can still navigate familiar spaces easily, not because they can see well, but because they've memorized where everything is placed. Similarly, memorizing common prices doesn't mean we have good price judgment. For example, if you usually buy shampoo for $20, seeing a new brand at $40 might seem expensive, while one at $5 might seem cheap. But without this previous reference point, you wouldn't know if $20 is expensive or cheap for shampoo. So what happens when we need to price unfamiliar products? Psychologists conducted an experiment to find out. They showed participants uncommon market items like unfamiliar chocolates and wines and asked them to estimate prices. But before making their estimates, participants had to write down the last 2 digits of their social security numbers on a form. As expected, price estimates varied widely since people aren't good at absolute pricing. However, the fascinating discovery was that people with higher last digits in their social security numbers, like 88 or 99, consistently gave higher price estimates than those with lower numbers. This demonstrates what psychologists call the anchoring effect. The anchor is like the anchor we drop when ships dock at the shore. The anchoring effect refers to how people use specific initial values as reference points when making quantitative estimates. Like an anchor, these starting values influence and constrain our estimates. Once we notice an anchor, It affects our judgment regardless of whether the number is reasonable or practically relevant. It's similar to how the last digits of our ID cards influenced wine pricing earlier. With this anchoring effect in mind, you'll understand that even perceptions of beauty can be relative. College students know that the same girl might be considered average-looking in a performing arts department full of beauties, but could be seen as stunning in a mining department with few female students. I had a friend who studied geological surveying who told me after graduation that his standards of beauty had been significantly skewed during college. If our judgment of someone's appearance can be influenced by the anchoring effect, then our pricing of unfamiliar products is even more susceptible to various external cues. These cues become important reference points that affect our price judgments. That's why we say price formation is more of a psychological phenomenon, influenced by many environmental factors. This raises another question. If our price judgments are so heavily influenced by external environmental cues, are we willing to accept prices when we judge them to be too high in real transactions? This leads us to the third aspect of price formation: willingness to pay. Willingness to pay is the amount of money we're prepared to spend on a product, though this willingness is highly subjective. Businesses can use various techniques to manipulate this judgment process and influence payment willingness. For example, you might go to a store planning to buy a $500 laptop, but after talking with the sales representative, you decide to buy an $800 one. The sales representative has changed your willingness to pay. Or you might plan to buy just one coat, but when you see a 20% discount for buying two, your willingness to pay increases. You buy more expensive items because you think you're getting a good deal, and businesses use psychological knowledge to make you feel this way. In summary, product pricing isn't simply a cost calculation or mathematical formula. It's more of a psychological construction. Various external factors influence consumers' price judgments, and businesses use these factors to manipulate consumer purchasing willingness. So how do businesses manipulate consumers specifically? The book discusses 3 key strategies: utilizing the anchoring effect, leveraging loss aversion, and employing the framing effect. Let's look at the first technique: using the anchoring effect. As mentioned earlier, anchoring occurs when people use a reference value to make relative price judgments. Businesses can manipulate our purchasing choices using this principle. For instance, if you're selling an $80 pair of shoes, place them next to a similar style priced at $120. This makes the $80 shoe seem like a better deal. Placing expensive items next to even more expensive ones increases sales of the former. The luxury goods industry particularly excels at using this strategy. A luxury brand typically displays 1 or 2 ultra-expensive handbags in each flagship store, such as alligator skin bags priced at several $100,000, truly astronomical prices. Right next to it, they'll place a similar styled ostrich leather bag that costs around $150,000. Most customers can't really tell the difference in quality between the $300,000 alligator skin bag and the $150,000 ostrich leather bag. Some even think the ostrich leather bag looks more luxurious. Since they're from the same brand and designer, the ostrich leather bag sells very well. In reality, the luxury brand wants you to buy the ostrich bag, so they price the other one extremely high. Once your mind is anchored to the several $100,000 price point, a $150,000 bag suddenly seems like a bargain. But imagine if you're surrounded by bags costing $500 to $600 and suddenly see one priced at $150,000. You'd think it's insane. The same product creates different perceptions based on context. That's the anchoring effect at work. Prada uses the same strategy. Many people walk into Prada and see incredibly high prices. However, Prada doesn't expect everyone to buy these expensive items. They're often just there to serve as price anchors. They offer products that cost less than 1/10 of their high-end items, like 10 styles of women's shoes, 2 or 3 handbags, and 4 or 5 gift items such as keychains and bracelets. You might think, if I can't afford the $300,000 item, maybe I can buy a $600 bracelet? That's exactly what Prada wants you to think. The profit margin on a $600 bracelet is astounding. This technique is everywhere in retail. You'll see clothing stores display an original price of $5,500 crossed out with a new price of $3,300. This pricing method feels like a better deal than simply showing $3,300 because $5,500 serves as the anchor price. People use this principle beyond retail to gain advantages. For instance, a company recruiting interns might place news clippings in their waiting room with headlines like "Recent graduates accept $800 monthly salary," "Master's graduates settle for $1,000 monthly salary," and "3,000 men compete for one position." You can see what the recruitment manager is doing here. Let's look at the second pricing strategy merchants use: leveraging loss aversion. Loss aversion means that the pain of losing something far outweighs the pleasure of gaining the same thing. The distress of losing $100 feels more intense than the joy of gaining $100. Sometimes this pain can be so intense it leads to irrational behavior. In 2009, a German billionaire committed suicide by crashing into a train after suffering heavy losses during the financial crisis. Remarkably, he still had $1 billion in net worth at the time. While most people would be happy with $1 billion, losing half his wealth felt catastrophic to this billionaire. The negative effects of losses are so significant that we're willing to pay a higher price to avoid them. Businesses often exploit this psychology to make us accept their higher prices. For example, a merchant might charge more for a product but offer a 30-day no-questions-asked return policy. This is designed to eliminate your fear of losing money on a defective product. Top-rated sellers on e-commerce platforms are masters at this. They often display large images showing problems with competitor products, marked with big red X's, warning you of the dangers. The message is clear: buy our product instead. It's safer, and though more expensive, it's guaranteed. This all plays on people's loss aversion. Historically, perhaps the biggest exploitation of loss aversion was the Catholic Church's sale of indulgences. The Church told people they could eliminate their sins and secure a place in heaven by purchasing these documents. People bought them because they feared losing their salvation. Loss aversion allows merchants to manipulate prices. The third pricing technique is the framing effect. This means that while something may be logically identical, different ways of presenting it lead to different decisions. For instance, would you prefer yogurt that's 5% fat or 95% fat-free? Most people prefer the latter, though it's exactly the same product presented differently. It's like the classic tale of the fox and the grapes. When the fox couldn't reach the grapes, he convinced himself they were probably sour anyway. Similarly, merchants change their product descriptions to make them seem more valuable. Psychologists have found that revealing product benefits one at a time is more effective than presenting them all at once. TV shopping channels are particularly skilled at this technique. Imagine you're selling an inexpensive knife set. Simply saying, "These knives are cheap and sharp, buy them now," wouldn't be very effective. In 1978, advertiser Arthur Seif took on such a case. His approach was, "How much would you pay for this knife?" Before you answer, listen: "It comes with a fork, it's incredibly sharp, and makes chopping a pleasure. But wait, there's more. It's actually a 6-in-1 kitchen tool, including a steak knife and a unique spiral cutting blade." By the end of the commercial, viewers might not remember exactly what knives they bought, but they felt they got an amazing deal. See how describing the same knife differently, either as a simple cheap set or detailing each benefit, creates entirely different perceptions and willingness to pay. As behavioral economist Tversky famously said, "We choose between descriptions of options rather than between the options themselves." A college daughter wrote a letter to her parents, saying she was living with a man 10 years older than her and was now pregnant. Although they weren't married, she cherished their life together. However, she was unsure about keeping the baby because she had been diagnosed with tuberculosis during a medical checkup. Her parents were absolutely shocked and could hardly accept this news. But as they continued reading, the letter said, "Don't worry, everything I wrote above was made up. However, I need to tell you that I failed my math exam." If you were her parents, wouldn't you feel that failing math was the best news you'd heard today? You see, businesses have many tactics. So as consumers, how do we deal with their strategies? This brings us to our third topic: how can consumers avoid falling into pricing traps? There are two approaches we can take. The first is to use our rational thinking more actively. As mentioned in the book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, by Daniel Kahneman, our brain uses two modes when making decisions: System 1 and System 2. System 1 is our unconscious intuition, which we use for about 90% of our decisions. It's like a car's autopilot system. System 2 is our rational thinking power. While using rationality requires more effort, it leads to more reasonable conclusions. We often fall into pricing traps largely because we're constantly using System 1 thinking. If we activate System 2 instead, we're more likely to see through pricing strategies. In other words, we should think things through carefully before reaching conclusions, considering whether our decision-making process is reasonable. For example, when we're tempted by a sales pitch in a store, we should ask ourselves, what made me interested? Was it just the promotion? Should I only consider the promotional aspect? Besides the attractive discount, are there any downsides? Do I have space for it at home? Have I used the last one I bought? Can my credit card handle it? Considering these factors might lead to a more rational decision. Take psychologists' research. They had two groups of professional used car appraisers evaluate the same car. The first group was told by the owner, I think this car is worth $50,000, while the second group was told, I think this car is worth $30,000. Logically, professionals should evaluate based on the car's actual condition, regardless of the owner's stated value. However, the first group, who heard the $50,000 price, consistently gave higher valuations than the second group, who heard $30,000. See how even professionals are affected by the anchoring effect. To break free from this anchoring effect, psychologists conducted a similar experiment, but this time, after the owner mentioned the $50,000 value, they added, but yesterday, my friend said, my price estimate was too high, but after adding this reminder, the two groups of evaluators gave very similar assessments. This experiment teaches us a lesson. By thinking in reverse and leveraging rational thinking, we can weaken the anchoring effect. The author suggests having a friend nearby, when shopping, who can help you think rationally, play devil's advocate, and provide reminders. Of course, don't bring someone who's even more susceptible to impulse buying than you are. That would just give you another unfortunate anchor point. Using rational thinking is our first strategy, while the second is actively employing pricing strategies to influence sellers. Sellers are human too, affected by the same psychological effects we discussed earlier, so you can use anchoring, loss aversion, and framing effects to your advantage. We often use these methods unconsciously in daily life. For instance, when haggling, saying, why is this so expensive? The store next door sells it for $90 creates a new anchor point. Saying, if you can't even discount $10, I'm leaving plays on their fear of loss. Understanding these principles helps you apply these techniques more skillfully and broadly in life. Take job interviews, for example, particularly when discussing salary. Most people either accept the company's standard offer or directly state their expected salary. However, if you're selling your labor, you can use pricing strategies in your negotiation. For example, a marketing director candidate responded this way. In my previous role as marketing manager, my annual salary was $380,000. Since then, I've completed my MBA, where my classmates are all highly successful. One even secured a position paying over $1 million. My expectations aren't that high, though. Last week, a classmate accepted a position for $430,000. I'm open to what your company considers appropriate. See how this candidate took control of the negotiation? Let's review the book's main points. Product pricing isn't simply a result of supply and demand balance, but a psychological construction influenced by various external factors. Since pricing is a psychological process, sellers can influence it to manipulate consumers. The three most common methods sellers use are the anchoring effect, loss aversion, and framing effect. To avoid pricing traps, consumers should engage rational thinking and actively use pricing strategies to influence sellers, becoming more rational consumers.